Neuroanatomy and physiology. The nervous system consists of the brain, spinal cord, and a complex network of neurons. This system is responsible for sending, receiving, and interpreting information from all parts of the body. The nervous system monitors and coordinates internal organ function and responds to changes in the external environment. This system can be divided into two parts, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system, the CNS, is effectively the center of the nervous system, the part of it that processes the information received from the peripheral nervous system. The CNS consists of the brain and spinal cord. It is responsible for receiving and interpreting signals from the peripheral nervous system and also sends out signals to it either consciously or unconsciously. Motor nervous system cells carry information from the CNS to organs, muscles, and glands. The motor nervous system is divided into the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. The somatic nervous system controls skeletal muscles as well as external sensory organs such as the skin. This system is said to be voluntary because the responses can be controlled consciously. Reflex reactions of skeletal muscle, however, are an exception. These are involuntary reactions to external stimuli. The neuron is the functional unit of the nervous system. Humans have about 100 billion neurons in their brain alone. Nerve impulses travel along each nerve axon pathway and cross a junction between them known as the synapses. Neurons is another name for nerve cells. Neurons are cells that carry information in the brain and in the central nervous system. While variable in size and shape, all neurons have three parts. Dendrites receive information from another cell and transmit the information to the cell body. The cell body contains the nucleus, mitochondria, and other organelle typical of eukaryotic cells. The axon conducts messages away from the cell body. For communication between neurons to occur, an electrical impulse must travel down an axon to the synaptic terminal. Information from one neuron flows to another neuron across a synapse. The synapse is a small gap separating two neurons. Three types of neurons occur. Sensory neurons typically have a long dendrite and short axon and carry messages from sensory receptors to the central nervous system. Motor neurons have a long axon and short dendrites and transmit messages from the central nervous system to the muscles or to the glands. Interneurons are found only in the central nervous system where they connect neuron to neuron. There are three membrane layers known as the meninges. The meninges are the protective covering of the brain and spinal cord. This is the origin of pain sensation. This is why meningitis hurts so much. Cerebral spinal fluid cushions the brain and spinal cord. The Dura Mater, which is Latin for tough mother, is tough, fibrous, and lines the skull and spinal cord. Beneath the Dura Mater is the arachnoid. Arachnoid villi stick into the sinuses and are a part of the arachnoid layer. They allow for reabsorption of CSF, about 500 mL a day. CSF is absorbed in the choroid plexus of the third and fourth ventricle. This is important because in subarachnoid hemorrhage or meningitis, debris, like blood, can clog the sinuses and the patient can develop a communicating hydrocephalus because the arachnoid villi can no longer absorb the CSF. An example of a non-communicating hydrocephalus would be tumors. The thinner pia mater, the tender mother, Latin, is transparent layer that covers the brain. Protective brain barrier formed by the blood vessels and the glial of the brain, and these tight endothelial junctions make up the blood-brain barrier. The blood-brain barrier is not an actual structure, but is a term that describes the special permeability of brain capillaries and the choroid plexus. It prevents some substances in the blood from entering the brain. The movement of substances into the brain depends on the particle size and the lipid solubility, etc. Cells talk to one another. The permeability of the blood-brain barrier is altered with brain injury, radiation, and toxic substances and can interfere with this protective mechanism. Alcohol, caffeine, antidepressants, nicotine, oxygen, water, carbon dioxide, glucose all cross the blood-brain barrier. The cerebrum, which is just Latin for brain and the largest part of the brain as a whole. It is here that things like perception, imagination, thought, judgment, and decision occur. The surface of the cerebrum, the cerebral cortex, is composed of 6 thin layers of neurons which sit on top of a large collection of white matter pathways. The convolutions have ridges which are called gyri. Singular is gyri. iris, and valleys which are called sulci, singular is sulcus. Some of the sulci are quite pronounced and long and serve as convenient boundaries between four areas of the cerebrum called lobes. The furthest forward is the frontal lobe, from the Latin word for forehead. It seems to be particularly important. This lobe is responsible for voluntary movement and planning and is thought to be the most significant lobe for personality and intelligence. Behind the frontal lobe is the parietal lobe, from a Latin word meaning wall. It includes an aura called the somatosensory cortex, just behind the sulcus, separating this lobe from the frontal lobe. Stimulating points of this area found patients describing sensations of being touched at various parts of their bodies. Just like the motor cortex, the somatosensory cortex can be mapped with the mouth and face closest to the temple and the legs and feet at the top of the head. At the side of the head is the temporal lobe, from the Latin word for temple. The special area of the temporal lobe is auditory cortex. As the name says, this area is intimately connected with the ears and specializes in hearing. It is located near to the temporal lobe's connections with the parietal and frontal lobes. At the back of the head is the occipital lobe, which is the visual cortex. This receives information from the eyes and specializes, of course, in vision. The diencephalon contains several structures, each with the term thalamus. Most of these structures derive from the developmental vesicle called the diencephalon. The contents of the diencephalon include the dorsal thalamus, commonly called the thalamus, the subthalamus, epithalamus, and the hypothalamus. The pineal gland is also part of the diencephalon. The thalamus is a walnut-sized structure buried at the center of the cerebrum. Nearly all sensory information that enters the cerebral cortex goes through the thalamus. The major exception to this rule is olfactory information, which goes from the olfactory epithelium